He was just a boy, alone on the cold streets, clutching the only thing he had to eat. Nobody noticed him. Nobody cared, or so it seemed. Then, with a voice trembling but urgent, he shouted something that made everyone freeze. One man, richer than most could imagine, stopped dead in his tracks. What secret was this child protecting? And why would it shock someone who thought he had seen it all? The answer would reveal a truth most refused to face. It was a chilly autumn morning, and the streets of the city were already alive with the hum of buses, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens. Malik, a 15-year-old boy with a quiet smile and a restless spirit, threaded his way through the familiar maze of cracked sidewalks and graffiti-stained walls. He lived in a part of the city most people avoided, a neighborhood where dreams often went to die, yet he moved through it with a strange sense of hope. His mother worked 2 jobs, barely sleeping, while his younger sister clutched her school books with a mix of fear and determination. Malik had learned early that life demanded resilience, even when the world offered little in return. Despite the weight of responsibility pressing on his small shoulders, Malik had routines that brought him moments of escape. He loved the tiny park tucked between worn apartment buildings, where the swing set creaked under his lean frame, and he could watch the sky open above the city's grime. Those few minutes of freedom were sacred. He had a knack for noticing things others overlooked: a broken toy left behind, a bird struggling in the wind, a stranger's tired eyes. Somehow, he absorbed the world's pain quietly, storing it like a secret. School wasn't much better. The hallways echoed with whispers and sneers, subtle reminders that he didn't quite fit in. Teachers praised diligence but rarely noticed fear simmering beneath his calm exterior. Some students assumed he was used to it, as if the hardships of his neighborhood were a natural cloak he wore willingly. What they didn't see was the boy who sometimes went home hungry, counting coins for a loaf of bread, or the nights he lay awake listening to his mother's muffled cries from the other room. Each day added invisible weight, shaping a young mind with a deep sense of justice and empathy, even if the world around him often seemed indifferent. On that particular morning, Malik's path home from the corner store was routine, a familiar sequence of turns past shuttered shops, the faint smell of baked bread from Mrs. Castillo's bakery, and the rattle of metal gates in alleys where the city's forgotten lingered. In the distance, the towering glass of the city's financial district reflected the sun like a cold reminder of wealth and power, worlds apart from his own. Malik often wondered what it would be like to belong somewhere so untouchable, to walk without fear, without the weight of suspicion pressing down on him because of the color of his skin. But this morning was different, even if he didn't know it yet. There was a tension in the air, a subtle shift he could feel under his feet. A man in a crisp suit, carrying a briefcase that looked far too heavy, paused near the corner, glancing down the street as if expecting something. Malik's eyes met his for a brief second, a flicker of recognition, of something unspoken. Then he looked away, instinctively cautious. He didn't know that a simple act, something he would say without thinking, would stop that man in his tracks and set in motion a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. For Malik, life had always been a careful balance between survival and hope, between staying invisible and standing tall. That delicate balance was about to be shattered, in a way that would expose not just the inequalities he lived with every day, but the stark realities hidden behind the city's shiny facade. In the coming hours, a single moment, a shouted warning, a hurried gesture would change everything. Malik turned the corner, the weight of his small bag pressing against his shoulder, when he noticed a group of men loitering near the entrance of an alley. Their eyes followed him, lingering longer than polite curiosity would allow. He quickened his pace, heart thudding not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had learned early that presence alone could make someone a target. One of the men, older and burly, muttered something that made Malik freeze, though the words were almost swallowed by the city noise. The tone, the glance, they spoke louder than any sentence. As he stepped closer to the main street, a sleek black car slowed beside him. The window rolled down, and a man's face appeared, partially hidden behind dark sunglasses. Malik's instincts screamed caution. The man's eyes scanned him briefly, then the street beyond, and for a moment, Malik felt like a piece of furniture noticed, observed, but entirely powerless. The car moved on, yet the sense of being watched clung to him like a second skin. By the time he reached a small corner store, Malik's nerves were taut. He had been coming here for months, buying small items with change he counted carefully. Yet today even this familiar routine felt uncertain. Inside, the clerk greeted him with a nod, but Malik barely registered it. His attention was drawn to the shelves, to the small items someone might overlook, but he wasn't shopping for convenience. Today, he was hungry, yes, but also cautious, aware that in this neighborhood, attention could be dangerous. He grabbed a small package of bread and a piece of fruit, and that's when he saw another boy, younger, smaller, standing by the doorway. The boy's expression was sharp, urgent, almost desperate. Malik didn't know him, yet the intensity of the warning in his eyes made his stomach twist. And then the words came, shouted across the store in a voice that carried a fear far older than his years. "Don't eat that." Malik froze, confused. The clerk looked up, eyebrows raised. Other customers glanced over, some curious, some irritated. He followed the boy's gaze and saw what he hadn't noticed before. The fruit in his hand was partially bruised, and hidden within the rot were tiny signs of contamination, subtle enough that most people would miss. His mind raced. This wasn't just about food. It was about survival, trust, and a knowledge few dared to recognize. At that moment, the man from the car walked in, imposing, polished, the kind of presence that could make a room hold its breath. He paused, scanning the scene, as though trying to decode a language only he understood. Malik's pulse quickened. Something about the tension in the air told him that this encounter wasn't random. The boy's warning, his own frozen confusion, and the sudden appearance of this man formed a triangle of unspoken truths, secrets pressing down hard in the middle of a crowded store. And then came the subtle judgment, the silent accusation wrapped in curiosity and disbelief. Malik could feel it pressing on him, an invisible weight shaped by assumptions and privilege, the kind that could bend reality without a single word being spoken. He had experienced glances like this before: teachers, strangers, even law enforcement, but never so concentrated, so sharp, so utterly indiscriminate. It was as if he was being measured, evaluated, and found both fascinating and threatening at the same time. The tension ratcheted higher when the man finally spoke, though not to Malik directly. His voice carried authority, curiosity, and a trace of disbelief that could cut through steel. He leaned closer, his eyes locked on Malik, yet also flicking to the boy who had shouted the warning. The store seemed to shrink around them, every other sound fading into a tense silence. Everyone was waiting, consciously or not, for the next move. Malik knew that a wrong gesture, a misstep, could amplify the stakes. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something simmering, a sense of quiet defiance, of knowing he was standing at a crossroads where the unseen rules of society, the unspoken prejudices, and the stark inequalities were about to collide in a way that could change everything. The store seemed to shrink around Malik, the air thick with tension, every breath heavy with anticipation. The man in the suit stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the worn tile floor, and for the first time, Malik noticed the sheer scale of the gaze he was under, not just from the man, but from everyone around him. It was a look that measured worth, threat, and guilt all at once. His chest tightened, stomach twisting. He knew the world outside these streets didn't see boys like him as people. Not really. The boy who had shouted the warning remained close, eyes wide, trembling, gripping Malik's arm. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, a faint frown crossing his face. Malik tried to steady himself, but his fingers shook, clutching the bag of bread and bruised fruit like a lifeline. In that instant, he understood this wasn't about food. It wasn't about a mistake. This was about a world that judged him before knowing him, a society that had spent decades teaching fear and assumption. Then came the words, calm but cutting. "Do you know what you just tried to do?" The man asked, his voice low, carrying an edge that could slice through courage. Malik opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. The room seemed to tilt. Every glance, every whisper was magnified. He could feel eyes on him, curious, skeptical, suspicious. He realized, with a sinking dread, that he was under scrutiny not as a person, but as a symbol of something larger, something the world wanted to control and define. The tension snapped when a bystander muttered loudly, "Why do you always have to cause trouble?" It was a familiar accusation, wrapped in civility, soft but cutting. Malik's chest burned with anger and shame. He wanted to shout back, to defend himself, but the weight of authority pressed down too heavily, a silent warning that any misstep could escalate everything. The man in the suit reached out, lifting the fruit from Malik's trembling hands. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, unexpectedly, the man paused. Shock, disbelief, almost remorse flickered behind his mask. Malik realized the imbalance between wealth and survival, power and vulnerability, reality and prejudice had been laid bare, and as Malik held his breath, he realized something profound. Sometimes, survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about demanding to be seen, even when the world didn't want to notice. The tension in the store slowly eased, but Malik's heart continued to pound. The man in the suit placed the fruit carefully back on the shelf, acknowledging not just the warning, but the courage behind it. Malik felt relief mixed with unease. He had survived, but the weight of what had happened pressed on him like a stone. In his chest, outside, the streets looked the same, indifferent in their routine. But Malik knew he had seen the world differently, and perhaps, in a small way, the world had seen him differently too. That one moment, one shouted warning, had cracked open a window into the reality that many ignored. Children like him navigate life under constant scrutiny, judged not for their actions but for skin color, poverty, or social standing. As Malik walked home, each step echoed with fear, defiance, and quiet pride. He had done nothing heroic in the traditional sense. He had simply spoken a truth and stood his ground when the world assumed he would flinch. Yet that small act carried enormous weight. Even one act of honesty and courage could ripple further than anyone realized. Back at home, his mother greeted him with the same tired smile, unaware of the ordeal he had endured. Malik carried a story inside him, one that reflected a world where injustice hides behind polite facades, and children must navigate danger daily. The man in the suit, too, left the store changed. He had been confronted by a reality that wealth, education, and status could not insulate him from the raw truth of systemic prejudice and overlooked humanity. Malik's story is more than a single moment, it is a reflection of a larger truth. Millions face similar judgments, discrimination, and inequality every day. Racism is not always loud. It whispers through assumptions, policies, and unexamined biases, shaping lives and testing courage. Malik's story ends here, but the conversation does not. It asks a question we cannot ignore. How many more children will have to shout warnings, endure scrutiny, or navigate fear simply to survive? How many acts of courage will it take before the world truly listens, reflects, and acts? Sometimes survival is about more than staying alive, it is about being seen, heard, and valued. Malik survived, but countless others continue the same invisible battle. The challenge and the call to all of us is clear: notice, question, and act. Every voice, no matter how small, matters.